Chapter 22, The Smugglers. Dante had not been a day on board before he had a very clear idea of the men with whom his lot had been cast. Without having been in the school of the Abbé Faria, the worthy master of La Jeune Amélie, the name of the Genoese tartan, knew a smattering of all the tongues spoken on the shores of that large lake called the Mediterranean, from the Arabic to the Provençal, and this, while it always spared him interpreters, persons always troublesome and frequently indiscreet, gave him great faculties of communication, either with the vessels he met at sea, with the small boats sailing along the coast, or with the people without name, country, or occupation, who are always seen on the quays of the seaports, and who live by hidden and mysterious means which we must suppose to be a direct gift of Providence, as they have no visible means of support. It is fair to assume that Dante was on board a smuggler. At first, the captain had received Dante on board with a certain degree of distrust. He was very well known to the custom officers of the coast, and as there were between these worthies and himself a perpetual battle of wits, he had at first thought Dante might be an emissary of these industrious guardians of rights and duties, who, perhaps, employed this ingenious means of learning some of the secrets of his trade. But the skillful manner in which Dante had handled the lugger had entirely reassured him. And then, when he saw the light plume of smoke floating above the bastion of the Château d'If, and heard the distant report, he was instantly struck with the idea that he had on board his vessel one whose coming and going, like that of kings, was accompanied with the salutes of artillery. This made him less uneasy, it must be owned, than if the newcomer had proved to be a customs officer, but this supposition also disappeared like the first men, when he beheld the perfect tranquility of his recruit. All right, chapter 22, just starting me off with a tongue twister. My God, those long sentences, Dumas. I have a hard time just wrapping my head around all of the tangents within a sentence to fully understand and grasp what you're trying to convey. It's one thing when you read it, and it's another thing when you read it aloud, because this is the sort of thing I feel like my brain would have drifted, picking up just slight details here and there while I read it silently, but having to read it out loud, Jesus Christ. I encourage you to find this paragraph, any one of these long paragraphs, and just try to read it out loud. I'm not trying to show that my job is difficult by any means. I'm sitting in a cushy rocking chair right now with a cat underneath my feet. But the tongue twister and the brain twister of trying to fully articulate everything that's trying to be conveyed here is so ridiculously difficult for me. So, with that confusion, let's break down a little bit of what we learned from this passage as we are just kind of setting the scene, I think, for, what's to come on this new ship, this new chapter in Dante's life. First of all, the ship is called the Jeune Amélie, otherwise known as the Young Amelia. I think most listeners would be familiar with Amélie being, a popular film, but that has nothing to do with this. The Jeune Amélie is called a tartan. Now, for those of you who are not nautical, like myself, here's some research that tartans were very small vessels. They were used by fishermen, they were used by traders, and of course by smugglers, as the chapter title alludes to. But the reason this is important is because its size allowed it to slip past custom officers very easily, especially with a skilled crewman like Dante aboard. Let's talk a little bit about smuggling at the time. Not quite piracy, no eye patches and peg legs and stuff like that. They aren't hoisting up skull and bone flags, but smuggling was a huge feature of this time. Again, I guess think of it a little bit like the Wild West, because as we've discussed in our Napoleon chapters, there really wasn't a unified Europe at this time. Italy itself wasn't unified. These are archipelagos, so lots of places to go in and out of places. Trade was highly regulated, banned. Trade was precarious at best. Yes, you had all of these shipping, trading vessels going from port to port to sell things, to carry, cargo for people like Monsieur Morel, these businesses that would pay to have large shipments of things come in and sell to sellers. But that also opens up a huge market for contraband items. How do you sell something that is banned in one port but not in another? How do you get it out of one port? How do you get it across, these waters where customs patrols are constantly looking for people who might be skirting the law? That's where you get a ship like this. And because of that, you have to have a crew who's going from the port of Marseille, let's say, to an Italian port, to a Spanish port, to all the way up to England. And so when there's a part in this passage talking about knowing all the different tongues of the Mediterranean, the captain's going to be fluent in these languages in order to expand his business and be able to know who to trust and who not to trust. As it says, knowing the languages sidesteps the need for an interpreter, because an interpreter, especially when you're doing illegal activity, is going to sell you out real fast for a quick buck. So if you know the language yourself, at least as far as what you need to conduct business, then you don't need an interpreter, and you're all the safer for conducting your illegal business. The last thing that I think we learn here, and it's telling of the captain, in a way, my feelings on the captain reflect the captain's feelings about Dante. He alludes at the very end of that passage that the alarms are going off at the Château d'If, and he is under the suspicion, let's say, that Dante isn't exactly who he says he is, that all this shit's going on, and it just happens to be a coincidence that Dante is being picked up naked at this time. And he says, though, that this makes him less uneasy. Dante's lying and all this situation's making him trust Dante more than if he was just picking up a customs officer. So because they're, in the business of smuggling, someone who is crafty but isn't outright taking advantage of these folks helps him trust Dante more. And as I said, as a reader, that helps me trust this captain more. I don't know his name yet, but I would find it hard to back someone who's being so clearly given a false bill of goods, as Dante is doing here. Dante doing his best to sell the story, but how can you not put two and two together when there's alarm bells going off at the Château d'If right behind you, and you just happen to pick up a naked person claiming that he was dashed across the rocks, but there's no evidence of the rest of his story except the naked body of himself and the piece of detritus that he was floating on. So the captain seems like a smart cookie putting this together, and the fact that he trusts Dante because he's looking at his character makes me trust this captain a little bit more. I'm hoping he's going to be one of the good guys, but I don't want to fall into early Dante territory and just trust him blindly. So I guess we have to continue with chapter 22 to find out who this captain is and what he's all about. So join me here tomorrow as we venture into new waters in the Countdown of Monte Cristo. Until then, I'll see you. Goodbye. The Countdown of Monte Cristo is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. This show is produced, edited, and hosted by Landon Solano. The original text of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Theme song by Magic Solo. If you want to support the show and others like it, visit patreon.com/gruntworkpod. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow.